Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. We're excited to have you all here. This is the second in the Trees for Trash webinar series. We had a presentation this past Monday on the native trees of this area of this state. So we really loved that, and we're excited to now talk about trash impacts on wildlife. And we have Caroline Burgett here, who is an amazing person. I'm so excited to have gotten to meet her this past year. She knows a ton about wildlife and nature and trash, and she is with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. And we're excited to hear from her today. So once again, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat or by raising your hand, and we will get to those. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caroline.
All right, thanks, Tara. All right, let's see if we can get this in full screen for you guys. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us here at lunchtime. I just want to go over kind of my journey on how I got here. So this began when I moved to North Carolina in 1998. I was 8 years old, and I remember my mom taking me to the North Carolina Big Sweep here at Campbell Creek Greenway on the east side each fall. This litter cleanup is locally co-hosted by Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. And while North Carolina Big Sweep is now defunct, we've replaced it with a big spring clean event in its place. I went on to North Carolina State University and got a bachelor's in zoology and wildlife sciences, where I joined the aquatic ecology lab as a volunteer processing fish stomach contents for a food web study on Lake Norman and Jordan Lakes. When I graduated to a not so great job market back in 2010, I packed up and moved to Starkville, Mississippi to get a master's degree in wildlife and fisheries science, again focusing on warm water, freshwater ecology. The fish people kind of took me under their fins, so to say. So moving to a much less urban environment, litter and trash was still pretty prevalent down in Mississippi. I started hosting litter cleanups with our fisheries student subunit down there, kind of on a routine basis. When I graduated from there, I somehow landed myself back here in Charlotte and working for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services, doing water quality monitoring work, tracking down pollution in our 3,000 plus miles of streams, and working with our volunteer groups, staffing the berry cleanup event at Campbell Creek Greenway location that I had started at 20 years before. I also started my own adoptive stream group in 2018. Up until the pandemic, we were doing cleanups around the city monthly. Kind of scaled back since then, but hopefully going to get that restarted at some point. I've since transitioned within stormwater to our operations department, where we focus on reducing flood risk across the county. We manage about 200 properties, over 400 acres in the floodplain, in highly urban areas, right? So these are where development occurred, neighborhoods were built prior to the floodplain regulations. So these are well-established neighborhoods in Charlotte, like Madison Park, Country Club Heights, the Doral Chantilly area, Hidden Valley, kind of all across these urban areas. And we're working with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation on several of these properties to improve habitat conditions, which has been a great partnership, just like Tara mentioned. In my spare time, I'm actually on the Keep Charlotte Beautiful board, and we help support the city's Adopt a City Street program and general just beautification projects across the city. So trash and the environment has definitely been a thread through most of my life. So waste disposal for most of us probably looks a lot like this. We bag up our trash, roll out our curbside bins every week, or we take our bags down to a community compactor or dumpster to be taken away by the trucks to the great beyond. Maybe we're in a more rural area, we load up our cars and we head down to the landfill directly with our trash. Widespread, robust recycling programs are generally less available, with limited markets accepting recycled materials these days for repurposing for a variety of reasons. definitely want to check in with your local waste providers. Make sure you're recycling things that are actually recyclable in your area and not just wishful recycling, because that can really bog down our systems. Just a little side note about that. However, despite widespread access to curbside trash and recycling, especially in urban areas like Charlotte, where every household is receiving this, we still experience illegal dump sites, convenience dumping, bulky item dumping, hazardous dumping, maybe even somebody's favorite adult beverage hangout spot, or just general roadside littering. So this kind of led me down the path of how much waste do we generate? I think that we're a pretty disposable society in general, but I just wanted to dig into some of the numbers of what we're producing as waste on a global scale. So that led me to a World Bank report in 2018 called What a Waste. It's a 300-page document if you're interested in this kind of thing. And this is one of the main takeaways, a depiction of the annual waste produced per capita, so it's kind of standardized across countries. And this is, again, based on weight, so that is really kind of skewed by material weights. Think about construction waste, food waste versus light things like plastics and styrofoams. Obviously, the United States and Canada are sticking out here as some high waste producers. I think about all the homes in Charlotte that are being renovated or even demolished and rebuilt entirely. So a lot of waste and a lot of just redevelopment in these areas. But overall, lower income countries, developing countries right now are generating less waste. Combined, the world creates over 2 billion tons of municipal waste annually. And the higher income countries are generating about 34% of that waste, even though they only make up about 16% of the world's population. Also in this report, again, the data is from about 2016. This report said that the world generated about 242 million tons of plastic waste, which was only about 12% of that municipal solid waste total. Again, think about weight. And think about how light plastic is, and we're generally making plastic even lighter. Think about the bottles with the reduced caps. Everything is becoming lighter, cheaper, so we can produce more of it. Just some more graphs from that report that kind of reiterate that the higher GDP countries are producing more waste. There's a few countries that kind of fall below that curve. So we've got some of the Scandinavian countries are kind of on the bottom side of that curve. Luxembourg and Qatar are doing a lot better compared to their GDP, but most countries kind of fall in this linear line. Higher income countries have a different makeup, composition of their waste as well. So there's a depiction of what the global waste makeup is, but higher income countries generally generate less food and green waste. It's about 32% of our total waste. And we generate more dry waste that could potentially be recycled if those pathways existed. So about 51% of our waste is in that dry waste category. The report did note that about a third of our total waste in higher income countries is recovered either through recycling or composting. Obviously, a lot more of the composting, obviously yard waste and things are composted heavily in the States, but sort of like food waste and stuff, mainly overseas. For the lower income countries, they generate over 50% food and green waste as their totals, while potentially recycled materials only make up about 16% of their waste streams. The report also found that over 90% of waste in low-income countries is still either openly dumped or burned, kind of these lower environmentally friendly waste practices, waste management practices. And finally, the report kind of gave a look into the expected increase in the total quantity of waste generated by low-income countries. Their prediction was that it's going to increase by more than 3 times by 2050. So what about litter, and especially litter here in America? We kind of understand how it gets there, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The biggest litter study done in America was by Keep America Beautiful back in 2009, and they found a couple of things: $11.5 billion annually in cleanup costs to Americans in general, decreasing property value by 7%. And a lot of their focus was on roadside litter and the composition of that, and found a lot of tobacco products, cigarette butts especially, made up about 38% of that roadside litter. And so Keep America Beautiful set out on a lot of education and pollution prevention tactics, education about cigarettes and tobacco products. They just did the follow-up survey for this study a decade later. They did it last year during the pandemic, and they haven't released the full report yet, but some of the highlights they have released: 90% of US residents agree that litter is a problem in their state. They surveyed more waterway sites this time. So their total, they did about 240 roadway sites, 189 waterway, 181 non-roadway, and 126 were behavioral sites. So all this combined, they found that they're estimated there's about 50 billion pieces of litter in America, about half of those along roadways, but they did note that those numbers were down about 54% from the last study. But they are noticing more and more looking at our waterways, and found about half that litter is in our waterways. And of course, with this study being done during COVID times, they estimated 207 million personal protective equipment items were littered on roadways and waterways through the early fall last year. If you've done a cleanup recently, you've seen masks, gloves, for sure, have become a problem, especially. And all of this adds up to about 2,000 pieces of litter per mile. Another note, for some of their cigarette litter prevention programs, they did note that cigarette litter was down about half, down about 50% in those areas. So showing kind of the results of some of their targeted litter campaigns. So let's dive into some of the impacts of this litter on wildlife. We see entrapment, entanglement, suffocation, laceration, impalement, ingestion, habitat degradation, leaching of pollutants, and transportation of invasive species. I'm sure there's more that I've left off this list. So all these things can happen for both terrestrial and aquatic species. Obviously, my background's more on the aquatic side, so we'll mostly be talking about our waterways in and around our waterways. But this is a recent case here. This goose here in Charlotte, it got a distressed goose call, and our animal control officers are dispatched. This particular case, the officer was able to capture the goose and found that there's actually monofilament fishing line and a hook that was wrapped around its neck, entangling it up and causing that distress. And so the officer was able to remove that line. The goose made a healthy recovery and was released the same day back on site. Most of the time, though, the ending to these stories is not so happy. So interactions between marine organisms and persistent litter were first recorded in scientific literature in the late 60s. The ingestion of plastic items on Malaysian albatrosses on the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. In this study, they found plastic in the stomachs of 74 of 100 albatross chicks that had died prior to fledging in 1966. And at that time, it was about 8 items and an average of 2 grams of plastic per bird. Now this picture is from 2012 from the Midway Atoll, and I think the numbers are probably a lot higher than that now. So albatross, they go out to sea to forage for food, may intentionally target some of these things that look like food, or unintentionally scoop them up while they're getting fish and other items. Then the parents will return to their nesting sites in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and particularly Midway Atoll, and they regurgitate that food and the plastic back to their chicks. And this has kind of been the poster child for marine debris. So this 2012 study by Fish and Wildlife Service, over 90% of the 320,000 albatross chicks that hatch each year on the Midway Atoll refuge contained plastic in their stomachs. An estimated 5 tons of plastic are being fed to albatross each year at Midway Atoll. And so not only does that just occupy the space in our stomach, it can lead to dehydration. Sharp plastics can fatally puncture parts of the digestive tract. The plastics, the chicks do survive, the plastics are leaching toxins, either directly from the plastic materials or other toxins that have absorbed to them. That's going to accumulate in the digestive or in the tissues of the chicks and could compromise their survival long term. So where's the trash coming from? This is a remote island in the Pacific. A lot of this trash is coming from China, Indonesia, as well as the United States. And so we've probably all heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch or just garbage patches in general. These are generally located in the ocean gyres. So that's just a large system of currents, ocean currents that have formed with global wind patterns and the way the Earth is rotating and the land masses. So there's 5 gyres in the ocean. This one pictured here is the Pacific, but there's 1 gyre in the Indian Ocean, 2 in the Atlantic Ocean, and 2 in the Pacific. And so there's garbage patches in all of these gyres, and they're all varying sizes, and it's debris densities. There's different locations within the gyres, so you can kind of see there's an eastern garbage patch and a western garbage patch of concentrated debris in this North Pacific garbage patch or debris field. And debris field or patch is kind of a misnomer, or trash islands. This is the soup of litter and material floating throughout the entire water column, as well as on the bottom of the ocean floor and in the sediments. The debris is ranging in sizes from large abandoned fishing nets to tiny microplastics that we can't even see with the human eye. So you could actually sail through a lot of these and not really even see the litter because it's down in the currents below the surface and just kind of churning like a soup out there. One of the estimates I saw was of all the plastic that we use each year, about 10% will end up in the ocean. And of that, about 70% will probably sink, and only 30% is really in the currents and kind of being studied more frequently in some of these studies and these reports that we see. And less research has been done. I mean, there has been research done on the sediments, but kind of for the shock and awe as we see is in the water and kind of the pieces that are floating there. So in this garbage patch, it takes about a year for the garbage to migrate from Asia, and it takes about 5 years for the garbage to migrate back around from the United States and end up in that Great Pacific Garbage Patch between Hawaii and California that most people are referencing when they're talking about garbage patches. This is just one study on trying to get the latest numbers of kind of how much is out there. This was back in 2018. There's various estimates of the amount of litter. This one predicted 79,000 tons of ocean plastic, amounting to 1.8 trillion pieces just in this one garbage patch. Something really stood out to me is 46% of the weight of the debris was comprised of fishing nets and materials, derelict fishing supplies, and then of course the microplastics we're going to discuss in links later, but that made up just 8% of the mass, again, light plastics, but 94% of the 1.8 trillion pieces. Again, we got to think about study methods, and all of this is just an estimate, primarily of what can be captured in surveys near the top of the ocean, really. So that derelict fishing gear, making up 46% of the marine debris, is a huge issue for aquatic life. Of course, these items are made to catch animals. So they could be snagged offshore on rocks and reefs or just floating through the ocean where they can entrap fish, turtles, invertebrates, think about crabbing pots. They can entrap birds, mammals, seals are a big problem. You name it, it can get entangled and entrapped into these fishing gear. And just like we saw the goose at the beginning, this isn't just a problem with big nets. It's a problem back here at home on our shores. This picture here is the monofilament line collected in Florida. A lot of efforts going on out there. So That NOAA picture there, between 2006 and 2015, NOAA removed on average 37.7 metric tons per year of discarded nets from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So that's just one area where they were working to kind of clean it up. And then another stat I saw was from Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge in Florida. They have a monofilament crew that was going out every week to remove monofilament from the mangroves. In 1 year, 2015 to 2016, they collected 474 hooks, 320 lead sinkers, 164 lures, 138 bobbers, and enough fishing line to fill a 5-gallon bucket, which was about 1.2 miles of line. So definitely a lot out there, not only in the ocean, but closer to home on our shorelines and even in our freshwater systems as well. Entrapment is not just in these fishing debris. It can also happen in other plastic debris. I think about the bottles and the cans. This was one study I found, entrapment of hermit crabs in bottles in these 2 islands. So the debris on the beach, as well as in coastal vegetation, kind of created a barrier for these hermit crabs. This study estimated 570,000 crabs become entrapped in debris each year on the 2 islands. So you can see the little crabs there, and these 2 islands that they studied. Another potential pathway for issues is invasive species kind of hitchhiking a ride on litter across the ocean. So this was a big topic after the 2011 tsunami off of the coast of Japan. So as the water churned, terrestrial and aquatic organisms were dislocated, sought refuge on floating litter, and were carried by the gyre over to the west coast of the United States. And we saw a lot of this litter washing up, but it also carried some of these different species with it. And so this is one study that was done looking at a floating dock that was dislodged during that earthquake, and just look at the diverse species that were found on that dock. Litter can even provide a temporary shelter in areas like ports and marinas where there's high international traffic. They can be taken in by ballast water and transported across the globe. We know that ballast water can definitely introduce invasive species problems, as we've seen in the Great Lakes. So that litter in those really urban environments, in those marinas and ports, can really provide a little harborage for species to be transported. All right, so microplastics is a very hot topic going on in the research right now. So these are the minuscule plastic fragments that are smaller than 5 millimeters in size, which is about the size of a grain of rice. So as plastic bottles and films degrade or kind of break apart into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually they form these microplastics. And scientists now have found them pretty much everywhere, lakes, rivers, and inside aquatic animals. These were being produced in cosmetics. In the United States, we banned that in the end of 2015. Most of that manufacturing was phased out by 2018, 2019. But of course, the base to plastic are these little plastic pellets you see here, nurdles, plastic pellets, and powders. So anywhere that you're creating the base of plastic material, kind of creating these small plastic fragments intentionally, unintentionally, they may wash off of the plant and downstream into systems. And so this pretty popular story of the Formosa plant in Texas. I think there's a documentary on Netflix about it, but it's everywhere across the world that we're producing plastic. A lot of different countries have noted this on their shorelines in particular. And microplastics are also in our synthetic clothing. So synthetic clothing is degrading every time we wash and dry it, and those microplastics, the microfibers, are coming off our clothing into our wash water. So one of the studies done, or several studies done by the USGS, kind of compiled here onto one of their websites. So finding particles in 12% of freshwater fish. And now I think about it, back at my time when I was at NC State looking at fish diets, there were definitely fibers and beads in the stomachs of those fish we were looking at. Although we didn't record that data at that time, we were mainly looking at what the fish were eating, but there were definitely plastic beads, fibers mixed in there as well. Filter feeders are kind of the hottest, or the biggest accumulators of a lot of these microplastics, and so 50 and 90 particles per serving in commercially cultured oysters and mussels. So a big bioaccumulator of microplastics in those organisms. As far as studies in the Great Lakes have found 1 particle for every 8 gallons of Great Lakes water, tributary water. Within the Great Lakes themselves, over 1,200 particles per square foot of river sediment, and 112,000 particles per square mile of that Great Lakes of water. So it's not just a marine issue, it's definitely a freshwater issue as well. And so the USGS and the State University of New York Fredonia scientists were sampling the rivers that came into the Great Lakes to try and figure out composition of the microplastics and where they were mainly coming from. And so this is kind of a breakdown of the composition. Fibers and lines, again, from those synthetic clothes, from diapers, from cigarette butts, from wipes. All of that comprise a surprising 71% of the microplastics, with fragments, foams, films, and beads kind of making up the rest. And so you can kind of see in the picture here a styrofoam piece. We've all seen how styrofoam breaks apart, but look at how small a lot of these things are compared to that styrofoam piece. We've got the fibers, the films, and the beads, kind of everything kind of jumbled up in this picture here. So they didn't find too much of a trend. They found a modest relationship between urban watersheds and higher concentrations of microplastics, especially for fragments, films, and foams. But they were pretty surprised that there was no real pattern between land use and the most commonly observed plastic type of fibers. But these microfibers and microplastics are not just occurring downstream of urban areas anymore. They're found in remote locations on the tops of mountains, carried by winds and precipitation. So there's been studies done here in the United States, in Colorado, Rocky Mountains, as well as abroad, that kind of show this atmospheric deposition of microplastics in every environment. And they're getting through our wastewater treatment plants. This study was done in some Charleston Harbor wastewater treatment plants. And so they are treating some of the microplastics. A great majority of the microplastics are coming out in the sludge material. So studies have shown that the influent is taking in about 10,000 microplastic particles per person per day in the wastewater influent stream. A lot of that's settling out in the sludge, and then so that removes about 75 to 99% of the microplastics, which sounds like a good thing, but the sludge doesn't magically disappear there. I don't know where these particular wastewater treatment plants dispose of their sludge, but a lot of it is land applied, and that's going to get into the soil microbiome there as well. And even though we've treated a good, or so-called treated a good amount of these microplastics, the load, when you think about how much is coming in and how much water is leaving, they found that they're discharging still 500 to 1,000 million microplastic particles per day into the harbor estuary. And these ones particularly have a real potential for toxins to accumulate on them. So think about all of our industrial waste that's going through the wastewater treatment plants, and the plastics have a lot of bioavailability, a lot of little nooks and crannies for those toxins to absorb to them and then be carried out into the wastewater, or into the wastewater effluent stream that then returns to the environment. And of course we have to think about, you know, we assume that most of our wastewater here is treated in some form, but we still do have a lot of sewer overflows from people putting wipes and fats down the drain. And then, in the Northeast, we've got combined sewers that will mix stormwater and municipal water and release it into the environment. So if it's not captured here at the wastewater treatment plant, it's getting back into the environment. All right, let's switch gears a little bit off of microplastics. So a couple other things with litter. We know that food waste associated with litter can especially attract and harbor rats, flies, and other vectors for disease. Leaving behind dog waste not only directly introduces bacteria, but can attract rodents. I personally get a lot of calls about floodplain areas and mosquitoes. We see standing water and calls about mosquitoes, but the mosquitoes' favorite breeding habitats are containers, and a container doesn't mean necessarily just a 5-gallon bucket. Some of the favorite breeding spots are tires and bottle caps and other litter that holds even just a little bit of moisture. The mosquitoes will breed in. This study in Baltimore found that abandoned areas with waste management issues generally had bigger mosquitoes. That has implications about reproduction and quantity as well, even though they didn't directly look at those effects. And we spent a lot of time on plastics, but paper fast food products are not innocuous either. You might think that, hey, those might just biodegrade. Many of those products have the Gen X PFAS compounds on them as a moisture barrier. And even some of the compostable bowls that we see as more environmentally friendly still have that PFAS layer on it. And while chemicals like this and BPA are being phased out, many times their replacements can be just as bad, and these persist through the environment and can have a range of effects on the ecosystem. And these compounds are even found in fibers, especially carpets with stain resistance, or rain resistant raincoats, and other products. So this is just throwing that out there, something else to keep in mind in the litter world. And of course, we're seeing an explosion of PPE litter across the globe with COVID. You can go to this website, covidlitter.com, and report your interactions that you see with wildlife taking up some of this PPE. They're compiling a data set and publishing papers about those effects right now. All right, I think we've had enough of the doom and gloom, so I just wanted to highlight a few of the efforts to remove some of this litter from the environment. Of course, we have the Trees4Trash program that we're all here today about. Some of the updated numbers, at least from a couple of days ago, taking in these trash in 25-pound increments and then replanting native trees, shrubs, and pollinator plants. And we have been happy to work with the Wildlife Federation on this project. NCDOT routinely has litter collection. It slowed down tremendously last year with COVID, but picked up very heavily here in January, and we're hitting record numbers of litter collection as of the end of April between their contractors as well as volunteers. NCDOT reported over 5 million pounds of litter collected from North Carolina DOT roads. And if you didn't know, if you do see somebody littering, which I think I saw it way more during the pandemic, even just look at stoplights around town, if you grab the tag numbers on those vehicles, if there's the North Carolina vehicle, the time and the place that you are, when you get back home, you can report a litter bug. They get a little letter in the mail just letting them know that, hey, somebody's watching, and just to remind them about littering and why they shouldn't do it. Some of the efforts that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater has undertaken. Recently, we partnered with Coca-Cola on a pilot project with these litter getters. These floating barges in the creek will collect floatables like plastics and styrofoams, as well as some of the other debris. And they are emptied after every storm event by the Catawba River keepers and other staff who are categorizing the waste that is collected and weighing it as well. Here's a picture of their sign that tells you a little bit more information about the watershed and how these work. Sad to say that I think that's one of my storm drains in my neighborhood on this sign. I do my best to keep it clean, but this is a persistent issue. You're never done with litter cleanup, that's for sure. Some of the preliminary numbers, so there were 3 of these devices installed last January. Again, they're collecting the light materials, plastic, styrofoams. They recycled 661 pounds and disposed of 3,000 pounds. So they tried to recycle what they could. Again, they were categorizing things along the way, and there should be a final report out soon about that as well. But we rely heavily on our volunteers. We love our volunteers, and they did not slow down during the pandemic. Even while we were in lockdown, we still were able to have pretty good numbers for the rest of the year of volunteers last fiscal year, and the amount of litter that they collected. Of course, that's estimated was up slightly, while our volunteer numbers and our area cleaned was down just slightly. And I'm sure you know, if you've done a cleanup, you get all sorts of things out of your week. One good tactic that we've implemented here recently is putting these volunteer event signs at the locations so that if they don't know about it through our other methods and they're just driving through the neighborhood, they're able to see that there's going to be a volunteer event there and kind of log out and get the details and come help out. We do adopt a stream groups that kind of go on their own time, but we've also have a program where every second Saturday we have an event. Before the pandemic, we would routinely have about 100 volunteers come out to those locations and help us clean up trash. And so it's amazing what you can get done. This was done in 2 hours of volunteer work. We also launched a text program on some of our greenways. This was primarily targeted at water chemistry conditions. So for me, the discolored streams are my main concern. Did it rain recently? Is that why they're turbid? But most people are sending me pictures of all the litter that they see in the greenways. So this is like a really low cost program that we have implemented, and it's just kind of fun to see everybody's perception of what's going on in our stream systems. Like I said, I'm on the board for Keep Charlotte Beautiful, so I just wanted to highlight some of their cleanup efforts. They also saw an increase in the amount of litter picked up last fiscal year, even with the drop-off, as well as they were able to shift their model of a lending system of litter pickup supplies, and they were able to use some funds saved from all the meetings and things that we're not having in person to use those funds to purchase supplies that groups can actually keep during the duration of their adoption program. So that's just been one change that has been made. And not just to harp on Charlotte programs, but Clean Jordan Lake, it's been going on for, I think, about 7 years or so. They've cleaned up about 20 miles of shoreline, and they have a little less than 10 more miles of shoreline to get rid of a 30-year legacy of trash. Oh, 2008, there you go. So more than 10 years, but there's the numbers. So they're just working to get rid of a lot of that legacy trash that was there when Jordan Lake was impounded. And they have an adopted shoreline program there too. Asheville Greenworks. So we've had those litter getters. Asheville Greenworks has trash trouts, which are the same barge concept. They've got about 9 of them out there in the French Broad River system. But Asheville Greenworks has launched a Microplastic May. If you're looking to reduce your consumption and try to reduce your impacts with plastic, we're about a third of the way through May, but you can log on or follow them on social media for just tips and reminders to reduce your plastic input. Back to Keep America Beautiful. So they have a Great American Cleanup event every year, and this year, because of the pandemic and everything, they're actually giving away litter cleanup kits. So you could use that for Trees4Trash as well as Great American Cleanup. With their 50 billion pieces of litter estimate, if you break that down per person in America, that brings you down to 152 pieces. So they have a campaign. If all of us cleaned up 152 pieces, we would go a long way to reducing our litter problem. Obviously, it's ongoing, and that number accounts for babies and elderly, but it's just a fun number to kind of keep in the back of your mind. If we all kind of cleaned up under 52 pieces, we could really tackle the litter here. And just one other last slide here. If you haven't seen the Mr. Trash wheel up in Baltimore, he's a pretty cool guy. They actually have 3 of these trash wheels up there. They're collecting trash flowing down river before it gets to the ocean, into the harbor. It's come up this conveyor belt and it gets dumped into a trash barge on the back, which is removable. And they have been around for 7 years, and that's kind of their total, and some fun things that they found throughout the years. So he's got some good social media stuff too, if you want to follow Mr. Trash Wheel. But that's all I really have for you guys today. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions. Like I said, this is just near and dear to my heart. I haven't done really a ton of research on it other than looking up some studies that I've shared with you here today. But I've definitely spent a lot of time out in the creeks collecting litter, kind of seen it all. This guy up here is one of my favorites. This card expired in 2003. I found it in a creek in 2018. So I don't think it had been out there the entire time. I think somebody was just doing some spring cleaning or something. But that's one of my favorite slides there, or finds in the creek there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara, and we can try to answer some questions for you.
This was incredible. Thank you so much, Caroline. These numbers are seriously shocking. I took a ton of notes, and I don't typically do that on a lot of public webinars. So thank you for this amazing presentation. And we do have a few questions. Is 4Ocean having an impact in the drift zones and other critical areas?
What's the
4Ocean?
Oh, the ocean cleanup efforts. Yeah, I didn't really hit on a lot of the ocean cleanup efforts. There's been some mixed results with that. I haven't been following them too closely. I really advocate, our creeks and streams are collecting these in very high concentrations in a very small area. So if we can get out and get it at the closer to the source, the better we'll all be. But of course, we have a ton of debris out there in the ocean, and we've got to figure out a way to kind of get it cleaned up. But yeah, I'm not as familiar with those right now.
No, thank you. That was helpful. Do plastic particles bioaccumulate in the upper food chain, or are they mainly, or do they mainly serve as vehicle transport systems and get eliminated without degradation?
Absolutely, they're getting bioaccumulated. Zooplankton are eating these microplastics as well, and they're just getting up and up the food chain. So not only are they releasing some of the compounds into tissues of the animals, but the plastics are remaining in the digestive systems as well.
Great, thank you. That was helpful. Deb asked where she could get involved in the Raleigh area, and Deb, we will send you over some contacts. We do have a chapter. We have 3 chapters in that area that are doing tons of trash cleanups. But if Caroline has any other resources, feel free to share that, Caroline.
Yeah, the City of Raleigh has Adopt a Stream programs as well, as does the City of Durham. So your local stormwater or public works department likely will lend you supplies, and then any of the Keep America Beautiful affiliates. So there's Keep Durham Beautiful. There probably is a Keep Raleigh Beautiful too. So definitely.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton to clean up everywhere in the state. Do the microplastics eventually break down so small that they can percolate through forest soil into groundwater?
Yeah, so I don't know necessarily about groundwater. I started to do a little bit of research to try and share with you about how they're affecting the soil microbiome, but they are definitely having an impact on those organisms, and it would be interesting to see if they are actually getting into groundwater. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in here. Question for you. You had mentioned the fishing lines and the nets are a really big issue. What can we do about this?
Yeah, so a lot of areas will kind of have a monofilament collection. It's usually like just a 4-inch piece of PVC pipe that fisher people can put their monofilament to. So making sure that those are emptied regularly. A lot of people will actually use them just for their trash, like their cups and things like that. So if you see that and you can kind of move some of that to a nearby trash can, that would be great. And then whatever organization is maintaining those, and then advocate for adding more of them around our boat ramps, just public fishing areas, and just cleaning up monofilament as we see it as well.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Any ideas on how to get fishing lines out of trees? They are really hard to reach.
They are. They make some extendable grabbers now, so you can try those, but they are real hard to get with the grabbers as well. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Do you know of anyone or any city that has implemented a program of storm drain filters with volunteers to collect from them, with the idea of getting rid of it before it reaches a stream?
Yeah, so those filters are primarily for erosion control. So they're to collect the fine sediments, and they are supposed to be emptied regularly. I don't know any that have done the inserts specifically for trash. I know that City of Durham has an adopt a drain program. So even if there's not a filter in the drain, you'll see a lot of that debris is captured on top. So the town of Matthews here in Charlotte is also doing an adopt a drain pilot program, but we just really advocate for neighbors to kind of clean out their drains in front of their homes and help eliminate some of that at the source.
Thank you. On the cigarette butts topic, can those be recycled, or what can be done about those?
Yeah, no. So another interesting, I think, I don't remember the statistic from Keep America Beautiful, but most employees recognized that there was not a place for cigarette butts at their workplace. So just even collecting them in the first place is a huge hurdle. I haven't heard of any good recycling programs for them. I know that the city of Charlotte, if you are in the Charlotte area, we have some voting booths. So it's kind of like just 2 funny questions that we're putting out in outside of bars so that you can vote your answer to the question with your cigarette butts. We're looking for restaurants and bars who want us to put those out there so that we can kind of help with this problem. So if you're interested or you know somewhere that might need that, go ahead and shoot me an email or shoot Tara an email.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. We have a statement question. Some people think that road storm drains empty into sewage treatment plants. We need education campaign to tell people that this is not so, that it goes straight into a creek, aka the ocean. Is any municipality doing some kind of education like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So most are. So there are 2 storm drain systems. Here in the South, we have the separate storm drain sewer system. So ours are draining directly to the creeks. Up in the Northeast, there are combined systems where some of that, and even Atlanta is partially this way too, some of the system will actually drain to the municipal side. But no, stormwater services, we go out, I think it's 4th grade and 7th grade. We try to hit as many classrooms as we can. We've done, with COVID, we've done webinar, read along days. There's several children's books about that topic as well to try and teach people at a young age. We do so many events out in the community. I think every municipality in North Carolina does some form of community event education, and that is a primary message we try to get out. But thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really great question and answer. Did anyone else have any more questions? In the meantime, just wanted to let everyone know that the Neighborhood Cleanup Challenge is happening this week. It started on May 8th and it is going to May 16th. So if you all have trash to clean up in your neighborhoods, please go ahead and clean that up. Send it to me. I'll let the stormwater crew also know how much we are picking up, just because we are partners on so much of our work here. and just get out there and clean it up. And you can see more about that effort on ncwf.org, which I'll put right over here. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to raise your hand now or put it in the chat. I know I have a bunch of more questions, but I will hold off and unless some others have some more questions in mind. This was wonderful, Caroline. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Just one last kind of thought I have. Can you speak to the importance of cleaning up trash on the land so that it doesn't get into the ocean and kind of that like transfer travel of the trash from the land to the ocean?
Absolutely. So as we can kind of see, like the bottles and the plastics really have a huge impact. A lot of the things, but then things like tires are going to be breeding mosquitoes and, leaching out a lot of chemicals as well. So those dump sites that we saw, the county has really undertaken efforts to partner to try and clean up some of these dump sites. If you see any around, I would try to reach out to either your city street program, public works, stormwater program, solid waste program, whoever you can get a hold of. And report the dump sites, because we know about some of them, but not all of them, especially for NCDOT. They don't necessarily go out and tell a lot of their property very regularly. So just reporting dump sites so that they can be cleaned up. And we'll add them on to our Big Spring Clean sites if we know, or that Second Saturday program. Just people love getting out in the woods and you find all sorts of crazy stuff. But it definitely, like you had mentioned, like all that stuff eventually, especially the light floatable stuff, is going to be washing downstream into our creeks, reservoirs, and then eventually to the ocean.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you everyone for being on here during your lunch break today. So we appreciate it and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Caroline, again, and have a great day, everybody.